What's up guys, my name's Stu, and yes, you read that right, I am doing a tank build on the Fleet Miranda. I started working on this build after being jokingly challenged by Stowe Community Regular and person most likely to kill and replace me, Aristu. Visually, the Miranda doesn't look like something that could take a beating, plus we've seen more than a few blown up throughout the shows and movies, so the idea of a tank build on the Miranda seemed kind of funny. However, looking at the ship's stats, it's actually got everything I want in a tank. It's a cruiser, it's got attract firepower, it's got decent buff seating. Didn't seem like that hard of a challenge, so I ported over my Bowl tank build over to the Miranda and flew it through ISE, and it worked really well. I thought about just making that the video, moving my Bowl build over to the Miranda, but that seemed boring. You've already seen that build, why would I do it again? I decided to lean into a different direction. A lot of tank builds I see are usually on expensive legendary or lockbox ships, whereas the Miranda is one of the least expensive tier 6 ships in the C-Store. So with that in mind, I decided to put a bit more focus on cutting the cost of a tank build. Here she is, the Fleet Advanced Light Cruiser. I named it the Unreliable, both as a shout out to the Outer Worlds and because it sounds just enough like Reliant to be funny. Right now you're looking at my original Baul tank build from the previous video. Now as I said before, my main goal here was to do some cost cutting. So obviously the first big steps there are to get rid of anything that came off of a lockbox ship. So goodbye DPRM, goodbye Sentry Mode, and goodbye Honored Dead. The next thing I did was switch damage types. Baul weapons are fantastic for tanking, but their effectiveness is reliant on the 2-piece set from Low Buy Store gear. Now this is the build after the changes I made. I'm not going to go over the entire build because there's a lot of carryover from the previous one, so I'm just going to go over the changes I've made. I switched to phasers, specifically Agony phasers. I did this because 1, Agony phasers are great for attracting threat because of their dot, and 2, because phaser is really easy to build for. Switching to phasers allows me to throw in more reputation gear. First is the Terran Task Force Phaser Array, which is great for its scaling damage buff and for its withering radiation dot. I've also added the Phaser Wide Angle Dual Heavy Beam Bank, which means I have the full 3-set bonus for Lorca's Ambition. This means an extra Dark Matter torpedo will fire off at anything below 50% health. And in the back, I've added the Trilithium Enhanced Phaser Omni for its haste buff. Down here in the consoles, everything is pretty much the same until we get to the science consoles. As I said earlier, one of the goals of this build was to ditch the lockbox ship consoles, and since I'm not using Baul weapons anymore, there was no sense in keeping the console that buffs them. So in their place, I have put Approaching Agony for the buff to phaser damage, the buff to crit chance, and because it's click, has a nice damage resistance debuff. Approaching Agony is a lockbox console, but it's not attached to a starship, so it's a doable EC grind. A simulated module, because the crit chance and crit severity are nice. It's got a little buff to hull regen, which will help the hull heals for the tank, and because it's got a little bit of control expertise, which will help my Gravwell. It also comes from the Omega Task Force reputation, so it's easy to get. This next one's a little weird, but hear me out. Point Defense System. It's buffed by the other phaser consoles. It deals extra damage to frigates, so it's good for softening up probes. Fires in every direction, so it's almost like another fire at will. And it only has a 1-minute cooldown, so that, coupled with unconventional systems, you're going to get a lot of uses out of that. And the last of the new consoles, Fakiri Torment Engine. If you've been following Augmented Dictator games, you know he's been talking this console up a lot lately. The extra damage over time it gives is just absolutely fantastic for generating threat. This console is also the reason why I've changed up my specializations. I switched to Temporal Operative as my secondary to take advantage of even more dot damage from Entropic Rider. This has proven so effective, I'm probably going to end up putting this on my main tank build too. The personal traits are pretty much the same as before. In the last video I talked about the possibility of swapping out Menacing for Into the Breach. I ended up doing it and have kept that change for this build as well. In the Starship traits, I had to swap out Honored Dead because that is a trait off of a lockbox ship. In its place, I put Superior Going the Extra Mile for the heals it gives. This trait also has the added bonus of being really easy to obtain. You get it from leveling up the Miracle Worker specialization. When switching to the Miranda, I had to make some changes to the bridge officer seating because obviously it's a different ship, so yeah, it's going to have a different layout. I really wanted to keep Gravwell, so I put a Science Officer in the Universal slot. The Universal is also a pilot seat, so that allowed me to slot in Hold Together, which is a nice heal and damage resist buff. In the Duty Officers, I swapped out 24 or 47 just because those liberated Borg Doffs are so expensive. It seemed kind of a weird thing to keep on something I'm trying to cut costs on. Instead, I chose a Projectile Officer that'll buff my crit severity. Though if you can grind out the EC, a second Adakukan would probably be a better choice for the extra threat gen. There are still some other changes I think I could have made to cut a few more costs, like Bioneural Infusion Circuits because it's a low-buy console. I didn't think keeping one low-buy console would be that big of a deal, but I'm starting to second-guess that now. I was talking with Sarcasm Detector and he suggested the House Martok console. It has some nice stat buffs on it for a tank, but I really wanted the control expertise and the crit severity from Bioneural. I also really wanted to find substitutes for Cold-Hearted and Automated Shield Alignment, because they're both from event ships. Cold-Hearted you can get from the Phoenix store, but Automated Shield Alignment is currently unavailable in the game. But I left it there because it was a recent event ship, and I thought a good amount of people will probably still have that. I was considering Good Day to Die, and That's a Big Ship. They're both account unlock traits, but they're from the 2011 Legendary Bundle, which wasn't cheap, and it was only available for a limited time. So yeah, not exactly a budget build, but the goal here was to kind of mitigate the cost of a high-end tank. Now let's jump into the ISE and then the Parse. You can see with the substitutions I've made in order to cut the cost of the overall build, it still holds up as a tank build. 83% of the total damage in, 90% of the total attacks in, 0 deaths. Honestly, I think I could have gotten away with a few more cuts to lower the overall cost of the build even more. Big thanks to lowlifecat, aka Sarcasm Detector, for setting up these ISE runs during his live stream. Or was it BigPappaTart? I don't remember. I need to keep better notes. Sorry about that. Either way, links to both of their channels down below, as well as links to other fantastic Star Trek Online content creators. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, all that YouTube stuff. My name's Stu, and I know the channel has been pretty tanking heavy. It's not meant to be a theme for anything. It's just how it worked out. Don't worry, next video will be something pretty different.